Before I begin, I want to know where you're listening from. Wherever you are, I hope you'll feel this with me. For years, I carried something quietly, something I couldn't speak out loud. Every day was the same cycle: sing, perform, rehearse, smile, repeat. I put on a face for the world, for the fans, for the others, but beneath it all, there was a weight I couldn't shake. Some truths don't stay buried forever. The longer you hold them, the heavier they grow. For me, it felt like trying to breathe while someone pressed a stone against my chest. For 3 years, I stayed silent. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I didn't know how to speak without breaking something delicate, something sacred, something I wasn't ready to name. I thought I was protecting us, protecting the group, protecting the harmony we fought so hard to build, but in reality, I was protecting my fear, my uncertainty, and tonight, I can't pretend it doesn't exist anymore. It all began on a night that should have been ordinary. Rehearsals were over, our bodies sore, our voices raw from running through songs and dance after dance. I went outside for air, and he followed. We stood together in silence, neither of us speaking, just breathing in the quiet of the night. I don't know why, but the stillness felt infinite, like we were suspended outside time. And then I turned to him, and he looked back at me. His eyes were tired, searching, gentle, and in that moment, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding for years was already here, waiting. From that night on, I carried it with me like a shadow. Every smile, every joke, every glance across the rehearsal room, I felt it there, the pull, the connection, the unspoken understanding that something unnameable existed between us. But fear kept me silent. Fear of misunderstanding, fear of losing what we had, fear of disrupting the delicate balance of everything around us. And so I kept quiet, letting the moments slip by, letting the distance grow, all while wishing I had the courage to speak. There were times I thought he might say something, small moments of hope, like after a concert in Tokyo when we sat quietly, exhausted, letting the crowd's echoes fade. I watched him fidget, his hands tracing patterns on his hoodie, his eyes distant. I wanted to ask, to reach out, to bridge the invisible gap, but I stayed silent. I smiled instead, and we left it at that. Just another night swallowed by silence. People think they know us. They see the stages, the fan meetings, the interviews. They think they understand the story. But what they see is maybe 5% of the truth. The rest, the late nights, the tension, the things we never say, lives in the cracks, in the spaces where no camera goes, in the quiet that only we feel. And for years, I carried that quiet like a secret I couldn't even whisper to myself without trembling. I've read the rumors, I've seen the threads speculating about us. Some call it fanfiction, some romanticize it, but the truth is more complicated, more fragile, more human. It isn't about labels or fitting something into a box. It's about trying to navigate feelings in a world that never stops watching, never stops judging, and never stops expecting perfection from people who are allowed to be human, who are allowed to be scared, who are allowed to feel too much. I wanted to protect him. I wanted to protect the group. I told myself that staying silent was the right choice. But silence is heavy. Silence is loud. And over the years, I realized that the silence between us became a wall neither of us knew how to climb. He noticed. I saw it in the small things, the way he avoided my gaze during interviews, the way his laughter came a bit too late, the way he drifted just a little when he thought I wasn't looking. And the worst part, I let it happen. Jimin noticed too. He never pushed, never demanded, but his presence reminded me I wasn't alone. Even when the distance felt insurmountable, he offered support in small ways snacks, laughter, quiet gestures that made the air lighter. And Namjoon, always observing, always steady, never forced the moment, but let me know in his way that I could take my time, that honesty comes when you're ready, not when the world demands it. And then there was the rooftop in Osaka. I remember standing there, staring out at the night, and for the first time in years, I felt something shift. Not because anything dramatic happened, not because words were spoken, but because finally I allowed myself to be still, to face him, to let the weight of the last 3 years settle between us. We didn't speak at first. We just stood there side by side, and I realized that sometimes presence speaks louder than words ever could. When he finally whispered, "Do you ever miss who we used to be?" It wasn't a question, it was a confession. And for the first time, I felt the courage to speak. Not everything, not the whole truth, but enough to let him know that I had been carrying this with me, silently, painfully, for years. And he heard me. In that quiet, in that moment, I knew we were beginning to heal. Not fully, not perfectly, but in a way that was real. After that night, things changed subtly. Not dramatically, not in ways the cameras would notice, but in ways that mattered. During rehearsals, we stood closer, our glances more open, our silences less heavy. We started choosing each other again in small ways, deliberate ways, and the group noticed, not because we announced it, but because the energy shifted, J-Hope's jokes flowed naturally again. Jin's teasing carried warmth instead of tension, and slowly the invisible wall between us began to soften. The process wasn't perfect, the healing wasn't instant. Fame is relentless, and it distorts feelings, twists perceptions, and demands performance even when your heart isn't ready. But in the quiet moments backstage, in hotel rooms, in fleeting shared glances, I began to reclaim pieces of honesty I had lost. I began to realize that protecting an image at the cost of truth wasn't strength, it was fear. And so I stopped running, I stopped hiding, I began to speak. Not everything at once, but the pieces that mattered most. The letters I had written but never sent, the apologies I had carried silently, the confessions I had buried in my chest, all of it started to find its way into the light, first in tiny gestures, then in the courage to stand beside him, without pretense, without fear, without silence. The past 3 years weren't wasted. They were heavy, painful, isolating, but they proved one thing. That connection, when it's real, can survive distance, fear, and the weight of the world. That connection is fragile, yes, but resilient. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a possibility I hadn't allowed myself to imagine, a future where we could face the truth together, side by side, and let it guide us towards something honest, something human, something lasting. The days after that rooftop night were quiet, almost deceptively so. Nothing was announced, Nothing was dramatized, but the air between us had shifted. I began noticing him in ways I hadn't allowed myself before, not as a coworker, not as a member of BTS, but as someone whose presence could steady me, whose silence could speak volumes. Small gestures became everything. A glance held a second longer than necessary, a hand brushing mine by accident or maybe not by accident, and the comfort of simply standing near him without fear. I started to write again, not for anyone to read, but for myself. Letters that I never sent, notes scribbled on scraps of paper, thoughts I whispered into the darkness of hotel rooms, all just to process what I had spent 3 years burying. Each word was heavy, each line a release. It wasn't just about confessing feelings, I wasn't even sure how to label them, but about reclaiming the truth I had denied myself for far too long. During rehearsals, I caught him watching me sometimes, his expression unreadable but his eyes searching. I wondered if he felt the same weight I carried, if he too had stayed silent out of fear, out of loyalty, out of love, or whatever this was between us that didn't need a name. The group noticed something, of course. Their looks were subtle, the kind that only comes from people who truly see you. Jimin would nudge me with a teasing smile that said, I know, without ever needing an explanation. Jin's laughter carried a warmth that hadn't been there during the months of tension, and Hobie tried to orchestrate moments that would bring us together naturally, small interventions disguised as casual fun. Namjoon, as always, was the calm anchor, the one I could confide in without speaking aloud. But it wasn't all comfort. There were nights when the weight of the past 3 years came crashing back. When we were alone after a show, I could feel it. The old distance, the words unsaid, the walls I had built between us to survive the scrutiny of the world. I'd glance at him and see that same hesitancy mirrored in his eyes, and it broke me in ways I couldn't describe. I had convinced myself for so long that silence was protection, but it had only delayed the inevitable confrontation with my own heart. One night, on a long flight across the Pacific, the cabin dim and quiet, he leaned across the console, separating us. The world was asleep around us, the hum of the engines, a gentle reminder that we were suspended somewhere between countries, between realities. Do you ever miss it? He whispered, his voice low, almost vulnerable. The way we used to be? I turned to him fully, searching his eyes. The exhaustion and the vulnerability laid bare between us, and suddenly, everything I had been avoiding, the letters, the apologies, the confessions flooded me. I do, I admitted softly, my voice breaking before I even realized it. I missed everything, the way we laughed, the way we fought, the way we understood each other without words. I've carried it all silently, afraid to speak it out loud, afraid of what it might change. He didn't flinch. Instead, he exhaled a long, quiet breath, and for the first time, I felt him letting go of his own fear. That's why I stepped back in New York, he said, voice trembling slightly. I didn't know how to stay without labeling it, without risking it becoming something else. I wanted it to be just us, nothing more, nothing less. But I was terrified of losing it. Hearing him say it aloud shattered something in me, but in the most beautiful way. The shared burden of silence, of fear, of unspoken truths it was mutual. He had been navigating the same storm I had, only on the other side of it, waiting for someone to reach out, waiting for me. And in that moment, I realized that fear had kept us apart more than the distance itself ever could. After that flight, everything began to shift subtly. Backstage moments became opportunities to reconnect without words. A joke here, a shared glance there, a hand briefly resting near mine while adjusting a mic, small acts of presence that rebuilt trust brick by brick. I learned to listen to him in new ways, to sense the weight of his emotions without him saying a single word. And he began to do the same for me, respecting the slow pace I needed to find courage in my own voice. Even in public, the dynamic changed. Fans began to notice subtle differences in how we interacted, but the moments were never forced, never staged. They were real, honest, and tentative. We hadn't labeled anything, hadn't defined it, and perhaps we never would. But the small choices, the decision to stand near each other, to acknowledge each other without pretense, to show up even when the weight of our history made it difficult became our language. I started to realize that the 3 years of silence had not broken us. They had tested us, shaped us, forced us to confront the parts of ourselves we had hidden from each other. And now, finally, the possibility of something real, unguarded, and untangled began to exist. It was fragile, yes, but it was ours. During sound checks, during rehearsals, during quiet moments in hotel rooms, the connection grew, not through grand gestures, but through consistency and presence. He would catch me off guard with a smile that reminded me of who we used to be, and I would respond in kind. We didn't need to speak the whole truth, we didn't need to define it. We just needed to exist alongside each other honestly, and that was enough. The process was slow, deliberate, and sometimes terrifying. The world watches every move, every glance, every interaction, and I often wondered how much they would understand or how much they would twist our moments into something they weren't. But the most important part, the part that mattered the most, was what existed between us. In the quiet, away from the cameras, away from expectations, it wasn't easy, it wasn't perfect. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of release. The burden of hiding, of pretending, of fearing the truth began to loosen. And as he looked at me across rehearsal rooms, across hotel lobbies, across the spaces we had both once feared, I began to understand that connection isn't about speaking every word perfectly. It's about showing up even when it's hard, even when fear threatens to silence you. The rooftop in Osaka felt different this time. Not because the city was brighter or the night more still, but because I had finally allowed myself to show up, to be seen without armor. The lights of the city stretched endlessly below, but the space between us, the quiet that had haunted me for years, was what truly mattered. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say 100 times in my head, but now that I was standing there, heart racing, hands trembling, the rehearsed words scattered into fragments. He walked up silently, leaning against the railing beside me. For a long moment, we just breathed together, the night wrapping us in a kind of fragile peace. And then I spoke haltingly at first, letting the words spill out like a confession I had carried for too long. I told him everything the night in the rehearsal room, the letters I had written but never sent, the silent apologies, the moments I had missed, the love I had buried. Each word felt like lifting a stone from my chest, though the weight of years didn't disappear instantly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He just listened, his presence steady and grounding. When I finished, the silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, but sacred. And then he said, "You weren't the only one who was scared." Those 6 words shook me in the way I had hoped to be shaken for years. He had been carrying the same burden in his own way, hiding, fearing, waiting for someone to reach across the silence. Relief, recognition, and vulnerability all collided at once. In that quiet moment, it became clear. The past 3 years of fear and distance hadn't destroyed us, they had merely tested the depth of what existed between us. From that night on, the world didn't change, but we did. We began to choose each other again, deliberately, consciously. In rehearsals, he would stand closer not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Our glances lingered a little longer. Touches that had been accidental now became intentional. We didn't announce it, we didn't label it, but every subtle gesture, every unspoken acknowledgement built a bridge over the silence that had once divided us. The group noticed, of course, in ways that were gentle but perceptive. Jimin, ever the heart of the group, let small jokes slip, teasing us in ways that drew us together. Jin's laughter carried warmth instead of tension. Hobie orchestrated moments during rehearsal where we would naturally meet in choreography or casual conversation, carefully weaving our reconnection into the fabric of the group without forcing it. Namjoon, always observant, offered quiet guidance and support, never pushing, never prying, letting us rebuild at our own pace. Even Yoongi, who usually spoke little in this moment, offered subtle gestures of reassurance. During a late night studio session, when frustration threatened to surface, he would pass a simple instruction or a nod that reminded us we were still a team. His silent understanding told us that we didn't need to perform perfection, we just needed to be present for each other. But the world outside didn't pause. Fans watched every interaction, every glance, every unintentional brush of hands. The rumor mills spun faster, speculating, theorizing, interpreting what they saw in ways that were sometimes romanticized, sometimes dismissive, and yet we didn't feel pressured to perform for them. We had made a silent pact between ourselves. We would not hide, but we would not perform intimacy either. We would simply exist, honestly, within the fragile space we were reclaiming. Private moments became our anchor. A late night flight across the Pacific, the cabin dim and silent, became a place for shared vulnerability. We talked about the things that had scared us, the moments that had made us doubt ourselves and each other. He admitted that he had been terrified that naming what existed between us would change it, and I confessed that my silence had been an act of fear, not strength. In those conversations, the walls fell further, replaced with a trust and understanding I hadn't dared to imagine. Back in rehearsals, the transformation was subtle but profound. We began to mirror each other again, naturally. Shared glances, synchronized movements, small touches, all of it felt organic, a reflection of the connection we had nurtured in the quiet. Music, always our shared language, became the vessel through which we expressed the truths we couldn't yet name. During sound checks, when emotions ran high, he would pause, gesture me to sing a line again, not for anyone else, but for the honesty between us, the moment that had started on that rooftop months ago. And the group continued to support us in quiet, meaningful ways. Jimin's energy flowed naturally again. Hobie's choreography created moments of proximity that weren't forced but intentional. Jin's teasing carried the warmth of understanding. Yoongi's guidance reminded us that our connection was part of the creative process, part of our art, and part of the shared trust that kept BTS strong. Namjoon, our anchor, continued to remind me without mentioning specifics that it was okay to ask for help, to be vulnerable, to let someone in. Through all of this, I began to understand that healing wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden. It was a series of small choices, moments of presence, and acts of honesty that layered over years of fear. We didn't define anything with a label, and perhaps we never would. But we discovered that connection is more than words. It's trust, consistency, and the courage to face each other without pretense. Even in the public eye, the dynamic changed subtly. Fans noticed the difference, but they didn't fully understand it. That was okay. What mattered was that we understood each other, that we were rebuilding the bridge over years of silence, fear, and unspoken truth. And slowly, delicately, the weight I had carried for 3 years began to lift. Every rehearsal, every hotel room conversation, every fleeting glance became a declaration of presence, of trust, of honesty. We didn't need to announce it. We didn't need grand gestures. Just standing side by side, acknowledging each other without fear became our language. And in that quiet, fragile space, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Hope that the connection we had nearly lost to silence could survive. Hope that what we were rebuilding, imperfect and unnamed though it might be, could exist without fear. Hope that we could finally face the world without hiding, without performing what didn't exist, and without sacrificing our truth. And for the first time, I realized that love, whatever form it takes, is not about dramatic confessions or public declarations. It's about showing up consistently, honestly, in both private and public moments. It's about facing fear and uncertainty together. It's about rebuilding what was nearly broken and finding strength in that vulnerability. Tour life didn't pause for healing. If anything, it made it harder. Cities blurred into each other, stages became a routine, and yet the quiet connection we had begun to rebuild gave me an anchor I didn't know I needed. Backstage moments, small and private, became sanctuaries amid the chaos. A shared laugh in the dressing room, an unspoken acknowledgement during sound checks, even a casual touch on the shoulder, they weren't grand gestures, but they were ours. They reminded me that despite the scrutiny, despite the pressures, the bond we were nurturing existed in its own space, untouchable by the world's expectations. In Tokyo, after a long day of rehearsals and filming, we found ourselves in a quiet corner of the hotel lounge. The city buzzed below, the lights of skyscrapers blinking like distant stars. He was sitting across from me, headphones around his neck, scrolling through something on his phone. His posture relaxed in a way that made me feel both comforted and tense. I wanted to reach out to bridge the last inch of distance I still felt between us, But the fear lingered, the fear of saying too much, of overstepping, of ruining the delicate balance we had just begun to reclaim. Finally, I let myself speak, careful, measured, yet honest. I didn't realize how much I needed this. I admitted. Just this. To be here with you, without all the noise, without all the expectations. He looked up, eyes softening. I know, he said quietly. I felt it too. These small moments, they're what keep me grounded. They remind me of why we do this, why we keep going, and why we've stayed connected even when it felt impossible. The words weren't dramatic. They didn't carry the weight of confessions shouted into the night, but they were enough. Enough to remind me that the silence we had endured wasn't a wall, it was a test, a crucible that forced us to see what mattered most. The group, ever perceptive, began to adjust subtly to the shift between us. Hobie orchestrated choreography that naturally brought us together during performances, moments that felt organic but strengthened the bond we were quietly reclaiming. Jin would tease us playfully, letting us share glances that spoke louder than words. Jimin offered his energy as a bridge, lightening the tension without ever making it forced. Yoongi, ever observant, allowed space for us to navigate our emotions, intervening only when necessary, guiding without intrusion. And Namjoon, the anchor, reminded me that it was okay to lean on someone else, that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and that true trust was built in moments like these. Even in the hotel rooms, the quiet moments became rituals of reconnection. Late at night, after rehearsals, we would sit together, sharing small conversations about the cities we visited, the food we tried, or the music that moved us. He would recall memories from our earlier days in BTS, laughing softly about inside jokes only we understood. And I would respond, letting my guard down piece by piece. The weight of the past 3 years didn't vanish, but it became manageable, contained within the moments we allowed ourselves to exist honestly together. One night in Seoul, after a rehearsal that had gone longer than planned, we found ourselves on the rooftop of the practice studio. The city lights stretched out before us, a sea of stars reflected in the urban glow. He leaned against the railing, and I stood beside him, the familiar nervousness tingling in my chest. I realized then that these rooftop moments had become symbolic, a space where we could confront our past, our fears, and our connection without judgment. I never knew how much I needed you, I said softly, almost to myself. He turned to me, eyes reflecting the city lights, and smiled. That same smile I had once feared and longed for. I needed you too, he admitted. Even when it was hard, even when we were scared, even when the world didn't understand. Those words, simple as they were, carried the weight of years of unspoken emotions. They didn't solve everything, didn't erase the distance we had endured, but they created a bridge, a pathway forward. And in that moment, I understood that healing wasn't about perfection, it was about showing up consistently, vulnerably, and honestly. The fans, as always, remained an unseen audience. Every interaction we had on stage, every glance, every laugh was dissected, theorized, romanticized, but we no longer felt the need to perform intimacy for them. Instead, we perform authenticity, letting the truth of our connection manifest naturally, without expectation, without exaggeration. The unspoken understanding between us became our silent statement, more powerful than any public declaration could ever be. During a charity performance in Busan, I finally felt the culmination of months of quiet reconnection. On stage, singing a stripped down version of a song that had always held meaning for us, I felt him beside me, his presence a steady anchor. When I reached the high note, the one that always tested me emotionally, he leaned closer, subtly adjusting his backing vocal to match mine perfectly. It wasn't about perfection, it was about honesty, about being fully present for the first time in years. After the song ended and the applause faded, he gave me a look, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we had endured, everything we had rebuilt. No words were needed. That look carried years of silence, fear, love, and trust. And in that moment, I understood that what we had been hiding, what we had feared, wasn't shameful, it was human. It was real. It was ours. From that night on, every rehearsal, every hotel stay, every flight became a canvas for quiet gestures, small confessions, and shared presence. We didn't need to label it, define it, or announce it. We simply existed side by side, learning to trust, learning to communicate, learning to rebuild what had been nearly lost to fear and expectation. And slowly, deliberately, the weight of 3 years of silence began to lift. The quiet moments began to outweigh the chaos of the tour. I started noticing the little things, the way he would glance at me across the stage, the subtle smirk that reminded me of the old days, the way his presence grounded me, even when the world seemed to demand more than we could give. We didn't need words for every feeling. The space between us had become a language of its own. Each gesture, each shared look was a declaration of trust, of understanding, of being present for one another. During rehearsals, I realized that our connection was affecting the group in ways I hadn't anticipated. The energy shifted subtly. Hobie's choreography no longer felt forced. It felt like it was helping weave our bond back into the rhythm of the team. Jin's playful teasing carried warmth instead of tension, a gentle reminder that affection could coexist with professionalism. Jimin's energy seemed lighter, more fluid, as if he too could sense that something fragile but powerful was healing between us. Namjoon continued to guide silently, offering support without intrusion, teaching me that strength wasn't always about doing it alone. One evening in Osaka, after a long day of filming, we found ourselves in a quiet corner of the hotel rooftop. The city stretched beneath us, lights flickering like distant stars. I turned to him, heart hammering, and finally allowed myself to speak without rehearsal or fear. I missed this, I admitted. I missed just being able to exist with you without pretending, without all the masks. He looked at me, eyes soft and steady. I missed it too, he said. We've spent so long being careful, holding back. Maybe it was fear. But now we're here, and that matters. It was simple yet profound. Years of silence, of avoidance, of unspoken confessions had brought us to this moment of fragile honesty. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, I realized, were powerful in their own quiet way. Backstage, These moments translated into subtle gestures. A hand brushing mine during soundcheck, a shared laugh over an inside joke, the way he would adjust his position slightly so our shoulders almost touched all of it was intentional yet organic. We were practicing presence, presence that had been missing for far too long, and the group adapted around us, supporting without needing to know the details. Their awareness was silent but comforting, a reminder that we were part of something bigger, yet allowed to heal our personal bond in our own way. Fans continued to speculate, of course. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared smile became fodder for theories and interpretations. But we didn't perform intimacy for them. We performed authenticity, a more difficult act than any stage performance. The unspoken understanding between us became a quiet rebellion against expectation, a demonstration that connection didn't need labels to be real. During a private moment on a flight to New York, the hum of the engines around us, the cabin dim, we shared words we had long held back. I admitted my fears, my doubts, my regrets about the silence that had nearly swallowed us whole. He confessed the same, how he had feared naming what we had might change it, might destroy the fragile connection we were only beginning to rebuild. We laughed quietly at the absurdity of our own fears, realizing that what we had endured together had only made our bond stronger.